Hi.
I'm Amelia.
I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug when my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach twist.
Hey.
Any chance I could crash at your place for a bit? The sender, Zach. My cousin. The golden boy. The one my mom had spent my entire life holding up like some sort of flawless blueprint I was supposed to replicate. For years, it was always Zach this, Zach that. Zach got into Stanford. Zach landed an internship at some hedge fund. Zach donates to charities and still finds time to call his mother every Sunday. So when I stared at his name glowing on my cracked screen, asking for a favor he didn't deserve, my first reaction was to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. The same guy who once told me I was wasting potential by studying literature instead of something useful, now wanted to sleep on my couch. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. The last time we were in the same room, it was at my grandmother's funeral. He showed up in a tailored suit, looking expensive and detached. I wore black jeans and a thrift store blazer. Our grandmother had loved me like I was the only person who ever truly mattered, and I think Zach resented that more than he ever admitted. He barely made eye contact with me that day. He spent most of it sipping water from crystal glasses and talking to the relatives who still believed he walked on water. But now he was texting me, and I hadn't forgotten the way my mom used to look at me after one of Zach's big announcements. Her eyes would narrow, her voice would get sharp. "Why can't you be more like Zach?" She asked it so many times it became less of a question and more of a sentence I carried like a shadow.
So yeah.
I stared at the message and let it sit there. Part of me wanted to leave him on read, but curiosity has always been my weakness. I replied.
Why?
He answered faster than I expected. "It's complicated.
Can we talk?"
I was tempted to say no, to remind him I wasn't his emotional landfill, but some sick part of me wanted to hear it. So I told him to come by at 8. I didn't clean up. Let him see how the less successful cousin lived. The doorbell rang at 8:02. I opened it to find Zach looking nothing like the curated LinkedIn version of himself. His hair was messy. His button-down shirt was wrinkled, and he had a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. I'd never seen him like that, undone. He looked past me into the apartment, like he expected it to be bigger, nicer. It wasn't. Just a small place with secondhand furniture, a kitchen that smelled like burnt toast, and a couch that doubled as a guest bed when I had one-night stands that lasted too long. He didn't talk for a few minutes. Just stood there holding that duffel bag, like it weighed more than it should. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. He said he'd left his job, that things had gotten bad. I didn't say anything, just moved aside, so he could come in. He sat on the couch like he didn't want to leave an impression on it. I went back to the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee, offering him one out of habit. He nodded like he was grateful for the gesture, not the coffee. He didn't tell me the whole story that night. Just bits. Hints. There was an incident at work. A misunderstanding that involved compliance. Words like that. Corporate smoke. I recognized it because I'd worked in admin for a firm once. Everyone uses those words when they don't want to admit guilt. Still, something in his eyes told me it was worse than he was letting on. That same night, he crashed on the couch without taking his shoes off. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years I'd spent being compared to him, about how many times I was told he was the gold standard. And now that standard was snoring on my couch. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up, but he'd left a note on the counter. Went to clear my head. "Thanks for letting me stay." I crumpled it up without reading it again. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I was supposed to finish editing a book draft, but all I could think about was how fast the pedestal he stood on had crumbled. That evening, he came back with groceries. Said it was the least he could do. I watched him from the doorway as he put things away. He looked tired, older, like some of the shine had been wiped off him by life. He stayed longer than I expected. One night turned into 2, then 5. He said he was figuring things out. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. I just let him take up space in my home like some ghost from a different version of my life. Then, on the 6th night, something strange happened. I came home to find him sitting in the dark, staring at his laptop. The screen was filled with spreadsheets and emails, but his face was blank. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Do you ever wonder if they only loved you because they thought you could become something useful to them?" I didn't know if he was talking about his parents, or mine, or both. I just nodded. That night, I dreamed about our childhood. About the time I won a writing contest in middle school and Mom told me Zach just got into a math enrichment program. Isn't that wonderful? Like my win was a hobby, and his was a legacy. I woke up sweating. A few days later, the twist came. I got a message from an old college friend who worked in corporate legal. She asked if I was related to Zachary Quinn. I said yes. She said he was being investigated for financial misconduct, embezzlement, that his name had come up in a major internal audit. My chest went hollow. I stared at Zach's toothbrush in my bathroom, his socks drying on my radiator, his duffel bag leaning against the couch. All of it started to feel dangerous. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just said it was more complicated than that, and that he hadn't been convicted. I asked him how long he planned to stay. He said until he figured out what to do. That's when something clicked. My mom's voice echoed in my head. "You need to be more like Zach." And all I could think was, you mean a liar? A fraud? A con man in a button-down shirt?
I started documenting everything.
Just in case. Where he went. What time he left. What time he came back. The names he muttered in his sleep. The burner phone I found tucked in his jacket pocket when he was in the shower. I didn't trust him. Not anymore. Then one morning I woke up to find him gone. No note this time. Just silence. But the weird thing was his duffel bag was still there. So was his laptop. I opened it. Password protected. I didn't try to guess it. I wasn't ready to know what was inside. Not yet. Instead, I took the duffel bag and unzipped it. Inside, I found files.
Dozens of them.
Printed bank statements, spreadsheets, and, strangest of all, a manila folder with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. What I found made my breath stop. It wasn't about me, not exactly. It was about my mother. And that was the beginning of the second twist I never saw coming. The manila folder with my name on it didn't make sense at first. Why would Zach have paperwork about me? My fingers trembled as I flipped through the contents. Photocopies of documents I'd never seen, printed emails, even a scanned bank slip. My name was on it, but the bank account listed wasn't mine. I stared at it, heart pounding, trying to process what I was looking at. There was a withdrawal slip signed by someone pretending to be me. The date matched the month when I had received a small inheritance from my dad's late aunt, a few $1,000s I'd planned to use for my student loans. But that money had never shown up. When I called the bank back then, they said it had been claimed. I thought it was a clerical mistake. I let it go. Now I knew it hadn't been a mistake at all. I kept digging. The further I went into the file, the sicker I felt. There were notes in Zach's handwriting. Names, dates, arrows connecting people. At the center of the mess was one word circled in red. MOM. There was an email printed out that made my mouth go dry. It was from my mom to Zach.
Short.
No greeting. No closing. Just a line. She doesn't need to know. Just take care of it like we discussed. There was no context, no explanation. But it sat on the page like a trapdoor, waiting to drop me into a truth I hadn't even realized existed. I sat back on the floor, the folder resting in my lap like it might catch fire. My mother. The same woman who spent years reminding me I wasn't enough. Who measured my success against Zach's without ever wondering how that felt. She was involved in something shady enough that even Zach had documented it. I wanted to deny it, but the evidence was here, in ink and paper, undeniable. They had taken something from me, possibly more than once. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake going over every memory, every conversation with her that now sounded different. Like static hiding a secret broadcast. Around 2 a.m., I got up and locked all the doors. I checked Zach's laptop again. Still password protected. I placed it back exactly where I found it. If he came back, I didn't want him to know I'd seen anything. Not yet. But he didn't come back the next day.
Or the day after that.
His phone went straight to voicemail. I considered calling my mom to ask if she'd heard from him, but the idea of her voice in my ear after what I'd read made my skin crawl. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time, my old roommate, Nora. She worked in cybersecurity. After a few minutes of awkward catching up, I asked her if she could unlock a laptop. She said she could, but it would take time, and she'd need it physically. I drove it over to her place without giving her details. Just told her I needed answers. She didn't push. She never had. A few days passed. I went through the motions, work, grocery runs, meaningless conversations. But inside, I was unraveling. Then Nora called. She said she cracked it. When I got to her apartment, she looked serious. She said, "Whatever this is, it's deep." I didn't ask what she meant until she showed me what was inside. Zach had been building a case, but not for the authorities. It was personal. There were audio files, recordings of conversations between him and my mother. I listened to one. The sound quality was grainy, but her voice came through clearly. She said, "You think I feel good about it?" I didn't have a choice. She was going to waste that money on rent and books. At least this way, it stayed in the family. I dropped the headphones. My legs went weak. She wasn't talking about someone else.
She was talking about me.
I asked Nora to send everything to me. I needed it all. When I got home, I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it Truth. I uploaded every file, every note, every sound clip. Then I called my mother. Her voice was too bright when she answered. "Oh, honey, how are you? Haven't heard from you in ages." I told her I knew, that I had proof, that Zach had kept records. There was a pause, just long enough to tell me she understood exactly what I meant. Then her tone changed.
Cold.
Controlled. "Be careful what you think you understand," she said. "You don't want to throw around accusations you can't take back." I laughed. Actually laughed. Because it was always the same with her, control through guilt. Manipulation wrapped in motherhood. I said, "Zach left it all behind. Whatever you two were up to, he bailed. And now I know everything." Another pause. Then she said he didn't leave. That froze me. I asked her what she meant. She said he was scared. Of what would happen if it got out.
Of you.
Of what you might do if you realized you were the one he used to clean his mess. Then it hit me. That bank account with my name on it? The money transferred through it didn't stop with a one-time withdrawal. It kept going. Thousands moved in and out. My identity. My name. Used like a shield for something far uglier. She said, "It was just paperwork, dear.
You weren't actually involved."
But I was. At least on paper. I hung up. Everything clicked into place. Zach hadn't just come to sleep on my couch. He came to hide behind me. And then, when I started asking questions, he vanished. But his laptop stayed. Like he wanted me to find it. Like he was dragging me into the fire with him. I filed a police report. Quietly. Anonymously. I sent a copy of the evidence to an old journalist friend. Told her she'd want to dig into the financial trail. I didn't tell her my name. Not yet. And then, a week later, I got a call from Nora in the middle of the night. She said, "Check the news." Zach had been found. Not dead, but arrested. At an airport. Trying to board a flight under a fake name. The story broke by morning. Former hedge fund analyst arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Photos of him in handcuffs plastered across the internet. The article said the investigation had been building for months. That someone from the inside had finally provided hard evidence. Someone anonymous. I stared at the screen, feeling both triumphant and hollow. That day, my mother called. Over and over. Voicemails piling up. Then texts. "We need to talk. This isn't what you think. You're not safe." That last part stuck with me. I didn't answer her.
Not yet.
I had one more thing to do. I dug back through Zach's files. Deep into the subfolders. That's when I found a video file labeled with just a date. 2 years ago. I clicked it. The footage was grainy, handheld. Zach was filming himself, speaking into the camera. He looked scared. Younger. He said, if you're watching this, it means I either got caught or I ran. I never meant for you to find this, but if you did,
I'm sorry.
I used your name. I didn't want to, but Mom said it would be clean, that it was temporary, that she'd fix it.
She always says that.
But it got worse. And you were the only one they'd never suspect. You were invisible to them. That's what made you valuable. The screen went black. And just like that, I knew I wasn't collateral damage. I was the perfect cover. But I wasn't invisible anymore. After watching that video of Zach, something shifted in me. It was like a pressure valve finally snapped. All those years of being compared to him, of being seen as the backup plan, the what not to do daughter, all of it blurred into one cold realization. I had never been seen at all. Not for who I was. Just for how well I could carry what they didn't want to deal with. Zach's crimes, my mother's manipulations, the trust they borrowed and burned. My name had been the smokescreen for fraud that stretched deeper than I'd imagined. The next morning, the media storm exploded. Zach's arrest became a trending headline. Analysts speculated about his financial dealings, news anchors dug into his prestigious background. But none of them knew the other half of the story, the part my mother played. The part where a woman used her own daughter's identity to launder money and cover up her nephew's crimes. I still hadn't told anyone my name. Not the police. Not the journalists. But it was only a matter of time before the investigation led back to me. I stayed in my apartment for 3 straight days. I pulled the blinds, locked the doors, barely ate. I went over every document, every email, every audio clip Nora had helped me recover. I compiled everything into folders, triple encrypted them, backed them up on 3 different cloud servers. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. Not like Zach. I was going to control the story on my terms. Then on the 4th day, my doorbell rang. I froze. No one had texted. No one had called. I crept to the peephole, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor. But it was her. My mother. Standing in a beige coat, sunglasses on, like she was trying to blend in with the sidewalk. She didn't knock. She just waited, like she knew I was on the other side of the door. My first instinct was to ignore her. But something about her stillness unsettled me. I cracked the door, but didn't open it. She didn't flinch. You need to listen to me, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired.
Hollow.
It's worse than you think. I didn't open the door. I just stared through the gap, the metal chain between us like a symbol of everything we'd never be able to fix. She continued. Zach wasn't supposed to get caught. We had a deal. But he got sloppy. He pulled you in more than I told him to. And now they think you're part of it. I asked her what she meant by they. She hesitated. The people we worked with. The ones who funded everything. That was the moment I realized we weren't just dealing with stolen inheritance money or manipulated documents. We were talking about organized fraud, investors, shell companies, offshore accounts. Zach wasn't just a rogue cousin with bad morals. He was a small cog in something bigger. And so was she. You have to leave, she said. Disappear before they decide you're not worth the risk. I shut the door in her face. Locked every bolt. She stood there a few seconds longer, then walked away. That night, I started preparing for war. I booked a storage unit. Moved everything important, documents, hard drives, backups, out of my apartment. I rented a second phone under a different name. I even opened a new bank account at a credit union 3 towns away. I wasn't going to run. But I wasn't going to sit still either. If they were going to come for me, they were going to find me armed with proof and a plan. The next twist came the following morning when a letter slid under my door. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with typed words. You're the last loose Yendi. Clean it up or get swept away. I read it twice.
No signature.
No address. But it didn't need one. I called the detective listed on the original police report I had filed. I told her I had new information. Evidence. Names. She agreed to meet in a public location. We met in a coffee shop near the courthouse. I brought only one drive with the bare essentials. She listened, brows tight, nodding slowly as I outlined the basics. When I mentioned my mother, her lips parted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "If what you're saying is true, it's not just fraud. It's conspiracy. Possibly racketeering." I handed her the drive. She said they'd verify the evidence and follow up. As I walked back to my apartment, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. Same car that had driven past twice earlier in the day. Same car I'd seen idling near the corner 2 nights ago. I went upstairs and packed a bag. I knew what came next. The pressure. The intimidation. The attempts to make me doubt myself or disappear. But they'd underestimated me again. Just like my mother always had. I didn't sleep that night. I watched from my window as the sedan drove away sometime after 3 a.m. I made a decision. If I was going to burn for this, I'd make sure they went up with me. I contacted the journalist friend again. This time, I gave her everything. Names, documents, voice recordings. I told her I wanted the story out in 48 hours.
No delay.
She asked if I was sure. I said I was. I was done hiding, done carrying the weight of their choices. The story hit the news cycle like a detonation. Mother-daughter identity fraud ring exposed. Insider speaks out. They didn't name me, but they named her. Patricia Quinn. Socialite. Mother. Fraud conspirator. The woman who told me I'd never be good enough unless I was more like Zach. Now her face was on every channel. And that's when the final twist landed. I got a call from the detective. "Zach wants to talk to you," she said. "He asked for you by name." At first, I said no. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to look at the person who sold me out with a smile. But something told me I had to go. One last thread to pull. One more truth hiding behind the mess. We met at the detention center. He looked thinner, hollow. But when he saw me, he smiled like he expected forgiveness. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. I didn't reply. He leaned forward. "They're not going to stop with us. You know that, right? They'll go after whoever's next." I asked him why he dragged me into it. He looked down at his hands. "Because you were clean. Because she said you'd never know. And I didn't think you'd ever matter enough for anyone to notice." There it was. The final insult, wrapped in a confession. But then he added something that changed everything. "She didn't tell you the rest, did she?" I stared. "She kept a second account.
Offshore.
In your name. She funneled money into it for years. Thought if things went south, she'd pin it all on you. It's in the Cayman Islands. But I know the password." I asked him why he was telling me. He smiled. "Because I'd rather see her burn than see her win." He wrote down the access code. I left the center with that piece of paper in my hand, knowing I had everything I needed to finish this. Everything they thought they buried in me. Doubt, guilt, silence. I was digging up and turning into fire. And I wasn't done yet. The access code Zach gave me was a sequence of numbers that looked harmless at first, but I knew better than to underestimate what it could unlock. Offshore accounts weren't the sort of thing you accessed through a normal login screen. These were protected by layers of encryption and veiled in corporate aliases. But I had help. Nora was already in my apartment when I returned from the detention center. She took one look at my face and said, "What did he give you?" I handed her the piece of paper. Her expression tightened. She knew what it meant. Within an hour, we were sitting side by side in front of her desktop rig, the code plugged into a specialized client only someone in her field would know how to use. The moment she cracked the firewall, her mouth fell open.
Jesus.
There were 7 accounts, not one. All linked to me. My name wasn't just the shield, it was the foundation. These accounts were set up gradually, over 6 years, all while I was busy trying to pay off student debt and figure out how to keep my lights on. The largest had nearly $2.8 million in it. But none of it was mine. Not really. That money came from dirty deals, false investments, and people who thought they were funding real ventures. It had all been funneled through my identity, built to collapse on me when things turned. The perfect patsy. A daughter no one really watched. A cousin no one truly respected. But now the money was exposed. Tangible. Frozen in numbers on a screen that could either ruin me or bring down everything my mother built. Nora looked at me and said, We have to report this. If you sit on it, it makes you look complicit. I nodded. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of what they'd think. Not of the family name. I had crossed a line the moment I gave that first drive to the journalist. Now I had to see it through. The next day, I met again with the detective. This time with legal counsel beside me. Emerson, an old college friend turned lawyer who had once helped me get out of a lease dispute with a vindictive landlord. She was sharp, ethical, and deeply allergic to bullies. As we laid everything out, every account, every trail, every falsified signature, Emerson did all the talking. I just sat there, watching the detective's pen race across her notes. When we finished, she said, "We'll need sworn testimony. Possibly witness protection, depending on how this unfolds." Emerson replied before I could speak. "She's not hiding. Not anymore." The investigation moved fast after that. With the offshore accounts confirmed and my digital trail cleared, law enforcement launched a coordinated operation against the others named in Zach's documents. 2 of my mother's business associates were arrested within the week. One of them flipped immediately, offering to provide testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. That's when things got personal. My mother was arrested at her yoga class. She had just finished leading her weekly mindfulness circle, preaching peace and gratitude, when the officers entered the studio with cuffs. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled, like she'd expected it all along. When reporters asked for comment, she said, "My daughter always had a dramatic streak." The trial was set for the following month. In the meantime, Vienna, Zach's sister, reached out to me. We hadn't spoken in years. She said she wanted to meet. I was suspicious, but curiosity has always been stronger than my caution. We met at a quiet diner off the highway, where the waitress knew her by name and brought us both waters without asking. Vienna looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the weight of decades had finally settled on her shoulders. She said, "I knew something was wrong for years, but I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know whether to believe her. So I just asked, why reach out now?" She looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Because I'm scared I'm next. And because I found something I think you need to see." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph, folded in half. It was of me, at age 19, standing beside a car I didn't recognize. My mother stood on the other side, signing a document. Vienna said, "That was the day they opened the first offshore account. That car was used as collateral. They told the bank you bought it." I stared at it, my face locked in a moment I didn't even remember. My signature had probably gone on something that day, something I'd been told was routine or just for paperwork. And from that, they built a financial empire made of lies. I thanked her and left. That night, I looked through all the photos I had from college. So many memories I thought were innocent now carried a sinister edge. The vacations I never went on. The cars I never drove. The meals at places I couldn't afford. They'd used my name like a passport into a life I never got to live. When the trial began, I sat in the second row. My mother didn't look at me once. Her lawyer tried everything: denial, deflection, even painting her as a victim of Zach's manipulation. But the evidence was ironclad. Every transaction, every email, every recording. The courtroom was silent when they played the clip of her saying, "It's just paperwork. She won't even know." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just waited for the gavel. The judge sentenced her to 15 years. Zach got 8 with parole. I walked out of the courthouse with the sun in my eyes and a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying suddenly gone. Nora met me outside with a coffee. Emerson followed close behind. "Now what?" Nora asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and deleted the contact labeled Mom. I erased every text, every voicemail, every photo. I wanted a clean slate, not to pretend it never happened, but to remind myself that I survived it. And then came the final twist. 3 days after the verdict, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "I always knew you'd be the one to end it. I only wish I'd told you sooner. Love, Dad." There was a check enclosed, made out to me, for $2.8 million. The exact balance of the largest offshore account. The signature matched the one from the Cayman transfer papers. I stared at it, not knowing whether to laugh, cry, or burn it. But deep down I understood. He had known. Maybe not all of it, but enough. And this was his version of redemption, silent, indirect, like everything else he ever did. I didn't cash the check. Not yet. I pinned it to the bulletin board above my desk, beside the words I wrote on a sticky note during the worst of it. You were never invisible. They were just too afraid to see you. Because now the world saw me. And I was never going to disappear again. For a while after the trial, life went quiet. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, where nothing settled, only paused. I tried to move forward. I painted my apartment. Got rid of every object that reminded me of the person I'd been when Zach knocked on my door. I cut my hair. Not as a cliché, but because I didn't want to look in the mirror and see the same face that had smiled politely through so many betrayals. But the past has a way of leaving splinters behind. Tiny, sharp things that find their way to the surface when you least expect them. A month after the sentencing, I got a knock on the door. This time it wasn't Zach or my mother or the detectives. It was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, pressed slacks, a blazer that screamed old money. She introduced herself as Margot Levanthal, a private investigator for an investment group based in Zurich. She handed me her card. On the back, she'd written, "We need to talk. Privately." We sat in the cafe down the street, the same one where I had once met the detective. Margot got straight to the point. Her company had traced substantial losses, millions, through the shell companies tied to my mother and Zach. The financial web led to a few key names. My name was one of them. "I know you weren't involved," she said, "but the paper trail is a mess. And, unfortunately, not everyone cares about context." I asked her what they wanted from me. "Clarity," she replied, "and cooperation. There are still people out there, investors, partners, silent financiers, who haven't been brought into the light. Your mother and cousin weren't acting alone." I was exhausted just thinking about it. I wanted to be done. I wanted to close the book and never say their names again. But Margot laid a thick envelope on the table. Inside were documents I hadn't seen, emails from accounts my mother hadn't disclosed, financial statements tied to a name I didn't recognize, Evelyn Ford. The address listed was one I knew all too well, my grandmother's. I stared at it. That name, Ford, it was her maiden name. I whispered. Margot nodded. We believed she was involved. It felt like the floor tilted. My grandmother had been the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered. The only person whose love wasn't conditional, whose praise didn't come with barbed comparisons. I couldn't believe she had anything to do with what they did. But the data didn't lie. I went home and tore through the few things I had of hers. Letters, cards, a few journals she'd given me. Most of it was harmless, warm memories wrapped in her old handwriting. But in the back of one journal, scrawled in smaller, tighter print, I found a passage that stopped me cold. They'll come for it eventually. I only kept the accounts open to protect what was mine. Patricia never understood boundaries. And Zach, he's too greedy to care. I left the key where Olive will find it, when she's ready. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. I dug through the antique jewelry box she'd given me before she died. Taped to the bottom, barely visible under the velvet lining, was a tiny key. I didn't know what it unlocked. Not at first. Until I remembered the bank deposit box. Years ago, she'd taken me with her to a small bank outside the city. Said it was grandmother business. When I asked what she kept in the box, she smiled and said, "Secrets, darling. The good kind." The next day, I went back to that bank with the key. The manager led me to the private vault. Inside the safety deposit box were three things: an old hard drive, a notarized letter, and a photograph of my grandmother holding me as a baby. The letter was dated 10 years earlier. To my dearest Olive, if you're reading this, then the war I feared finally arrived. I knew your mother would never protect you. I hope Zach might, but he was always too self-absorbed. That's why I did what I did. The accounts in your name weren't just bait. They were shields. I funneled your inheritance, your real inheritance, into them years ago, knowing Patricia would try to take what wasn't hers. I set traps. Paper trails that led nowhere. Decoys. But I knew the day would come when they'd twist even that against you. The hard drive contains everything. Every account I opened, every lie they told, every payment disguised as something else. You were never the fool, Olive. You were the firewall. And now you're the sword. Burn it all down, my love. And when you're done, rebuild. But never let them make you small again. With love and fire.
Grandma.
I broke down crying right there in the vault. It was the first time I cried throughout the entire ordeal. Because for the first time I felt seen. Protected. Even in death, she had been playing chess while the rest of us were still fumbling with checkers. I gave the hard drive to Margot. The fallout came fast. With my grandmother's data, investigators unraveled the last remaining knots. The men who funded the operation were exposed. One fled the country.
2 more were indicted.
The full scope of the fraud became public. Over $70 million stolen through a network of decoys, shell entities, and weaponized identities. And mine was the one that survived. 6 months later, I stood in the same courtroom where my mother had been sentenced, but this time, I wasn't sitting in the audience. I was on the stand, not as a suspect, as a witness. I gave my testimony with calm precision. No theatrics. No bitterness. Just truth. When it was over, the judge said, "What they did to you was not just criminal. It was cruel. And yet, here you are still standing." The media called it the quiet collapse of a golden family. But to me, it wasn't a collapse. It was a cleansing. I moved after that. Left the city. Took a job as a researcher for a nonprofit that investigates financial abuse and identity fraud. Quiet work. Fulfilling. Honest. I still have the check my father sent me. I never cashed it. I framed it. A reminder of everything they tried to use me for, and everything I refused to become. One night, a year after the trial, I got another letter. Handwritten. No return address. It just said, "I see you now. I really do. I was wrong. I hope someday that matters."
Z.
I burned it. Not out of anger, but because some ghosts aren't meant to be kept. And as the fire flickered in the bowl, warming my quiet living room, I realized something important. I had finally become the person my mother never dreamed I could be.
Whole.
Unbroken. Unbought. And nothing like Zach. Because while they built their empires on lies, I built something else. A life that could survive the truth.